It's awful. Not tasty at all. What is this? I can't bring myself to eat such a dish. I'm curious about the face of the person who cooked this. Leaving those words behind, my mother-in-law smiled lightly, looked at me intently, and eventually, while slightly touching the food on the plate, ended up throwing it in the trash. Seeing her behavior towards the food, I honestly wondered what kind of person she was. Was it really appropriate to treat food in such a way? Sitting next to her was her most beloved son. Did she see how sad he looked? My name is Susan. I'm an office worker and I just turned 30. I married my husband Ryan 2 years ago, but we don't have any children yet. Of course, we dream of expanding our family in the future, but for now, we prioritize our time together and want to enjoy our fulfilling days. Ryan has always been a considerate and kind man since we first met. I've never seen him angry. We both work during the day, and when it comes to household chores, we share them properly. I mainly handle the cooking, and Ryan diligently does the cleaning and laundry. My cooking skills aren't professional, but thanks to my mother's teachings, I can make various dishes. I can't express enough gratitude to my mother. However, because I would only be able to start preparing dinner after coming back home from a full day of work, we would end up eating a bit late. As for me, I can finish preparing several dishes in about an hour, so I thought that was an average cooking time. But then, my husband said something unexpected. Your cooking is really delicious. So, if possible, I'd like to have dinner a bit earlier. He seemed somewhat apologetic when he conveyed that. But I thought I was doing well preparing the main and side dishes, including soup, all in about an hour. I thought that's quite normal. As I looked a bit puzzled, Ryan immediately added, "No, that's not what I meant, sorry. I'm not saying you should cook faster. It's just that my mother always prepared this amount in about 15 minutes. Really? That's amazing. That night's menu included salad and soup full of vegetables. For the main dish, there was steak, and as a side dish, mashed potatoes. Thinking that all these could be made in 15 minutes made me wonder, perhaps my mother-in-law is exceptionally good at cooking? With a slight competitive spirit and pressure, I was motivated to cook daily for my husband. I made preparations so that dinner would be ready right when we got home, and I would even cut ingredients and do some prep work the night before. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get it under 30 minutes, always feeling regretful while keeping an eye on the time. Nevertheless, Ryan never complained and helped with laundry and other household chores while I was cooking. Ryan, I'm really sorry. I'm trying to be faster, but it seems 30 minutes is my limit. He comforted me, saying, "It's my fault, isn't it? The meals you make are really delicious, so I might have expected too much." Ryan gained about 10 pounds after our marriage, though he's still within a normal range. Seeing him happily eating and having seconds of the meals I prepared was my joy. As time passed, the topic of visiting our parents' home after a long while came up. "Hello." When I greeted everyone cheerfully as usual, a voice came from inside the house. "Susan, you're as energetic as ever. Your voice reaches every corner of the house." My mother-in-law's voice was light, and she seemed to be smiling, but her eyes were not laughing. This kind of thing happens all the time. In other words, she was probably being sarcastic by saying that the sounds I made were noisy today, but I didn't mind it. From the outside, it looked like a good relationship between a daughter-in-law and a mother-in-law. But the mother-in-law was really skilled at mixing female-specific sarcasm into praise and indescribable jokes. Naturally, my husband and always calm father-in-law never noticed it. In fact, I knew before I got married that my mother-in-law didn't like me. The cause was during a meal when both families gathered. "Oh, isn't that Susie?" The one who spoke to me like that was Ryan's grandmother. "Ah, Hilary, why are you here?" My mother-in-law looked at us calling each other so casually with a questioning and stern expression. Seeing my mother-in-law's demeanor, I tried to show respect by saying, "Good day. Might you be Ryan's grandmother?" But it was already too late. My mother-in-law was staring at me as if I was an enemy. I regretted it, but it was already too late. Since I had known beforehand from my husband that the relationship between his mother and grandmother was not good, I felt I should be careful. That day, my grandmother couldn't attend the gathering because she had a cold. Hillary's residence and the house where I grew up were close, and Hillary was a good friend of my grandmother. When I was living at my parents' home, she often came to visit, and since I loved my grandmother very much, I also got along very well with Hillary. They both lost their husbands, but they were spending their later years enjoying life with the motto, "Let's have fun even at our old age." When she looked at my clothes, she would say, "Susie, that coat looks warm. How much does it cost?" "This coat? I got it for about $20, I would reply. The three of us, my grandmother, Hillary, and I enjoyed our similar preferences. I want to go to a bar. Whenever there was such a request, I happily accompanied them. Hillary was like a second grandmother to me. My daughter-in-law is a bit clueless. She's not a bad person, but she's stiff and hard to get close to," Hillary often said. I thought it was harsh, but I never imagined I would experience something similar myself. After getting married, as I had imagined, the subtle sarcasms from my mother-in-law never stopped. "Susan, your makeup gets thicker every time we meet, doesn't it? Youth is wonderful." Or, "Ryan, you seem to have gained a bit of weight since you've been with her. Is the balance of your meals okay? Or is it the influence of both of you working?" There was a daily barrage of sarcasms. There was a time when I brought several dishes I had cooked for some occasion. "Susan, you're good at cooking, aren't you?" When my father-in-law commented like that, my mother-in-law was clearly displeased. After eating just a little of my dish, she said, "Is this really so amazing? I can make it easily, too." Showing off something like this lacks class, and spoke in a voice that only I could hear. After that, my mother-in-law didn't eat at all. Mom is also very good at cooking, so we are lucky. Right, Dad? When my husband said this, my father-in-law nodded. My mother-in-law wasn't displeased with that comment, and soon regained her mood. Her mood changed frequently, like a roller coaster. I felt a bit sad, wondering if the meal I made was not to her taste. But when I looked away for a moment, the leftover food had disappeared. When I secretly peeked into the kitchen, I witnessed my mother-in-law transferring the remaining dishes I had cooked onto a plate and storing them in the freezer. Thought, does that mean she liked it? Is she just being very moody, perhaps? I had the luxury to feel that way at that time. However, after hearing my husband's remarks the other day, I held a subtle sense of competition with my mother-in-law. "Mother, I heard from Ryan that you can prepare meals in a short time. I'd love to learn your secret." To that suggestion, my mother-in-law briefly showed a displeased face and retorted, "Why do I have to teach you? That's an absolute no. You're still a beginner. You have no idea how much time it takes to reach a level like mine." As usual, I received a slightly harsh response. It was particularly strict when it was just the two of us. No proper eye contact, not even looking straight at me. Being avoided to this extent hurt me, too. When we met before the meal, she was kind to me. However, as soon as she learned that I got along well with Ryan's grandmother, her attitude toward me changed 180 degrees, and she started treating me like an enemy. I hope that if we could understand each other a little more, we could build a better relationship, but it felt like a distant dream. The time I spent worrying increased day by day. Every time I visited my in-laws' house, my mother-in-law prepared the meals by herself. Actually, when I first visited my in-laws' house shortly after getting married, I once asked her, "Mother, is there anything I can help with?" I called her out from behind, but I didn't expect that it would surprise her very much. "This place. You shouldn't open it without permission." She suddenly closed the door to the kitchen. My reaction upon hearing that was one of great surprise and also confusion. I had heard from friends who were troubled by being strictly taught by their mother-in-laws, or who were made to repeatedly serve coffee during Christmas. So I felt that it was a relief for me in terms of not having to cook. It was a bit hard to be instructed to constantly tend to the garden during the cold Christmas Eve. However, It wasn't too difficult because my husband helped me halfway through. Thinking about it, the speed at which my mother-in-law's cooking appeared on the table was indeed fast. The first dishes served included hamburgers and potato salad. Then came corn soup and several other dishes. Each was at just the right warmth, had a somewhat nostalgic taste, and was very delicious. I would be happy if she could teach me her recipes. With that in mind, I started to often look at recipe books during my break time. Susan, you've been looking at cooking books a lot lately, haven't you? I'm really impressed that you're bringing such elaborate homemade lunches every day. I usually have frozen meals for lunch. The one who approached me with a smile was a younger colleague at the office. If I were single, I think I'd be no different from you. The frozen meals nowadays are well balanced, so I think that's fine. After listening to my words, my junior colleague passionately talked about his favorite frozen meals. I especially liked it when I got to sample a hamburger steak from a diner at the supermarket. It's really tasty. Following that conversation, I suggested to him, "From now on, your nickname will be Frozen Meal Lover, okay?" To which he replied with a laugh, "That's a bit." Amidst such daily life, before I knew it, my mother-in-law's 60th birthday was approaching. Last year, we had a grand celebration for my father-in-law's 60th birthday, so we couldn't ignore my mother-in-law's birthday. I was worried whether she would be happy with the celebration since she didn't like me. "Ryan, your mother's birthday is coming up soon. What should we do?" When I asked my husband, he said, "Actually, I'm planning a surprise," and smiled at me. And then, the following month was my mother-in-law's special birthday. I had a meeting with my father-in-law, and he agreed to take my unsuspecting mother-in-law out of the house for a while. My husband was already excited about the surprise, saying she'll definitely be amazed. Despite feeling a bit anxious, I helped my husband with the room decorations and continued waiting at home for my in-laws to return. "We're home." I heard my father-in-law's calm voice from the entrance of the house. That was the signal for the start. My husband and I hurried to the entrance and, with the crackers we had prepared earlier, we loudly said, "Happy birthday, Mom." However, when I saw my mother-in-law's face, her reaction was underwhelming. Honestly, she seemed even less happy than before. Trying to surprise me? But why here? This must have been Susan's idea, right? She glanced at me with a glare and then quickly entered the house. It was common for my mother-in-law to be cold to me, but it was surprising for her to act this way in front of her son and husband. Afterward, my father-in-law said, "I'm sorry. I got into a bit of an argument with Mom," implying that my mother-in-law got upset over something minor and hardly spoke on their way home. Feeling troubled, we followed her. As soon as she entered the living room, she let out a deep sigh. We had worked hard on the decorations, but she didn't seem to have any particular reaction to them. She sat down heavily on a chair, clearly in a bad mood. This atmosphere, it's not fitting for a celebration. It's awful. That's how I felt. "Oh, what about dinner? We worked hard for it." Then, my husband and I proceeded to the kitchen. That's when my mother-in-law yelled at me with an unexpectedly loud voice. "Wait, did you enter the kitchen without permission? Susan, can't you keep a promise?" She stared at me intensely. While I was struggling to respond, my husband said, "Why are you so irritated, Mom? It's okay to enter the kitchen." I told her it was okay. I had promised my mother-in-law not to enter the kitchen alone, but my husband, with a smile, encouraged me to go in, saying it was fine. Unable to say anything against her beloved son's words, my mother-in-law quieted down. My father-in-law watched the situation with a wry smile. The atmosphere was a bit awkward, but the hastily prepared, slightly unappealing dishes were lined up on the dining table. Perhaps out of consideration, my father-in-law kindly commented, "This looks delicious. I can't wait." But my mother-in-law was constantly in a bad mood, sulking like a child. When all the dishes were ready, we started the meal with "Happy birthday, Mom. Cheers." It was right after that. Disgusting. Not delicious at all. What is this? I can't bring myself to eat such food. I'm bothered by the face of the person who cooked it. My mother-in-law suddenly said that. Her gaze was definitely directed at me. Of course, it wasn't a fact that it was disgusting, but rather a sarcastic comment from her. When I remained silent, my mother-in-law added, I don't know how much effort you put in, but if this is the result, you still need more training. She snorted and smiled smugly. Her behavior didn't stop there. Saying, I can't eat such food, she threw the dishes into the trash. Unable to contain my anger, I raised my voice. What are you doing? Please apologize. Even so, my mother-in-law did not listen to my voice. In the quiet room, my husband, his voice trembling, said to me, Susan, that's enough. Let's leave this place quickly. However, my mother-in-law watched the exchange with a look of surprise on her face. After that, my usually calm father-in-law raised his voice. What have you done? Ryan worked hard to prepare those dishes for you. At this, my mother-in-law's face changed color in surprise. Perhaps she hadn't noticed because of her excessive anger, but Ryan's hands were covered with multiple band-aids. Seeing this, it seemed that my mother-in-law finally understood the seriousness of the situation. Oh, despite that, what have I done? Though my mother-in-law was shaken, there was no one there who felt like helping her. I spoke to my mother-in-law calmly. I know you don't cook much, mother-in-law, but preparing ingredients, seasoning, and cooking takes a lot of time and effort. But as I imagine the smiling faces of those who will eat it, I continue to cook with all my heart. As my mother-in-law remained silent, I said, I'm sorry. I couldn't find time to make the cake myself, so I bought it. I thought I would chill it in the refrigerator. So I opened it. At those words, my mother-in-law's face, which had been pale, suddenly flushed. When we opened the refrigerator, the reason for my mother-in-law's fast cooking speed became apparent. Inside the fridge was mostly microwave-ready foods, with famous brand cafeteria-style dishes being particularly noticeable. As we opened the freezer, we found it was packed with frozen meals. Seeing this, my husband smiled and said, Oh, it seems Mom is not good at cooking either. With her birthday approaching, Ryan was excitedly planning a cooking surprise. And for the next month, he practiced cooking night after night. You've been cooking so much, Susan. I'm always grateful for your delicious cooking. I'm looking forward to seeing the happy look on Mom's face. My husband often said, I suggested it would be better to cook at home and bring it, but he was determined to cook at his parents' house, wanting her to taste it fresh. I was worried, so I bought everything from cooking utensils to seasonings. My husband laughed cheerfully at me carrying even knives and cutting boards, but my intuition was right. My mother-in-law's kitchen was surprisingly clean. Many of the seasonings were old, and the cutting board was a bit dusty. I wasn't too surprised when I opened the refrigerator. I had noticed my mother-in-law's secret before. The hamburger steak I got from my junior colleague the other day had the same taste as the hamburger steak my mother-in-law was proud of. When my mother-in-law was cooking, I frequently heard a beeping sound. Today, I realized that it was the sound of the microwave. Microwave-ready foods are not bad. I also use them when I'm busy, but it felt questionable to boast about them as homemade. As she was still silent, I said this to her. My father was very poor as a child, and if I left even a little bit of food, I would be severely scolded. I was taught that those who take food lightly are the lowest as human beings. And with these words, it meant my mother-in-law fell into that lowest category. Furthermore, my father-in-law surprisingly added that he had decided to divorce her. What she had done was unforgivable, he said. No, please reconsider the divorce. In response, he sternly replied, You are apologizing to the wrong person. My mother-in-law quickly looked toward us and apologized sincerely. Whether or not they would get divorced was not an issue to me. However, I felt that it would be difficult for me to have a good relationship with such a mother-in-law in the future. For the past month, I had witnessed my husband's efforts, so I was purely disappointed. Glancing at him next to me, his expression was very angry. Unlike his usual self, after he finished tidying up his things, he said, Why should I forgive you? Those who take meals lightly are the worst human beings. Moreover, your attitude towards Susan throughout today was terrible. I'm sorry, but I don't want to see your face again." And with that, he left the house. Seeing him angry, I couldn't hide my surprise and said, I'll also take my leave, and I left my in-laws' house with my husband. I heard the crying voice of my mother-in-law from behind us, but I did not look back. After that, regarding my parents-in-law, it was somehow agreed that my mother-in-law would stay at their house under the condition that she would change her attitude toward me. Otherwise, her husband would divorce her. There was one phone call of apology to me. "I'm sorry, but for some reason, I just don't like the way you talk to me as your mother-in-law," she conveyed. "It may be a long time before I can hear a sincere apology, but I'm not looking for one. Whether they would get divorced or not, honestly, feels irrelevant to me." Later on, Ryan's grandmother, Hillary, began living in the same house with my parents-in-law. Originally, the house belonged to her and she lived there with them, but both parties were stubborn, and their relationship had been bad since the early days of marriage. Apparently, Hillary had fled to her daughter's house, which was near where I lived. Hillary, having heard about the recent incident regarding my mother-in-law's 60th birthday celebration, got angry. "I had already given up on you, but now that I know you've hurt my dear grandchildren, I can't stay silent any longer. From now on, I intend to correct your bad nature. It's not enough just to know how to use a microwave," she said. Thus, it seems that my mother-in-law, who had just turned 60, began to receive some belated housewife training from Hillary. That lady over there, the other day she apparently spent over 15 minutes just to peel one carrot. "I heard this from Hillary," said my grandmother when I visited my parents' house. Hearing that story, I smiled. My husband became emotional only on that particular day, and the next day he was back to his usual gentle self. As I saw him eating the food I made happily, I wondered if what had happened was just an illusion. But clearly, it wasn't a hallucination, and it seems he has no intention of forgiving his mother in the future. They were both stubborn, and I couldn't help but smile at the resemblance between them. Susan, what's wrong? Did you lose your appetite?" "You've barely touched your food," Ryan asked, concerned about my lack of appetite. I smiled brightly and pointed at my belly. Seeing that, my husband stood up in surprise and said, "No way. Soon, our family would get an addition." Hoping for a pure and kind-hearted child, I thought about spending the coming days with my beloved family. What's this? When I temporarily returned from a long-term business trip overseas, my husband Tyler let my mother and sister-in-law live in my high-rise apartment without permission. My mother-in-law didn't know anything, she said. "You've been a really big help for paying rent all this time." I'm grateful. They say that ignorance is bliss, but it is also a kind of misfortune. What do you mean? I deliberately feigned ignorance to them. What will happen to my misinformed family-in-law? My name is Wendy, and I am a 36-year-old office worker. I was divorced, had no children, and was a full-time housewife at the time of my first marriage. I frequently quarreled with my ex-husband and eventually separated over many issues. I have no regrets about it. However, looking back, I feel that both sides needed to grow. I have already lost contact with my ex-husband and are now both leading new lives. As if to prove that, I remarried about 3 years ago. After my divorce, I got a job and met my current husband, Tyler, at the workplace. Tyler also happened to be a divorcee, and due to similarities, we hit it off well, which eventually developed into a romance and led to remarriage. There was a time when I thought I would never get married again after the divorce. I even thought that I was not suitable for marriage. But after meeting Tyler, I also came to feel that it is okay to pursue happiness. I seriously hoped that this one would have a happy ending. However, marriage was still difficult. We were supposed to have learned from each other's failed marriages, but it was difficult to remain patient. 6 months after our remarriage, our initially caring relationship with each other slowly began to deteriorate, and we no longer saw the desired behavior we had hoped for. The opponent's shortcomings became visible. When I remarried, I decided not to quit my job and continue working. In my first marriage, I was a stay-at-home wife, but this time I intended to keep my job. Tyler agreed, and we continued to work together. Although it was agreed that household chores would be shared, Tyler's participation in housework was limited at first. Gradually, he abandoned all housework because he was busy, and in the end, I took on most of the chores. When it came to cooking, I was mainly in charge of it. It's not that Tyler didn't know how to cook, but he was waiting for me to make things. After the divorce, he knew this, but when I took the initiative to help, he took it for granted. Tyler thought that if I was the one doing it, then he could cut corners. As a result, now he doesn't help with anything except for taking out the trash. I had hoped that one day he would be willing to help, but that was not the case at all. I didn't see the point in waiting, so I told him, "I've been feeling a bit burdened lately. Do you have anything to say to that?" When I asked, he looked up at the ceiling and was deep in thought, but the answer came quickly. "Oh, I'm sorry, I'll do it properly next time," he said, but he didn't actually take action. I endured it for a while, but finally I couldn't stand it anymore. One day, I sat down with Tyler and I confided in him about my daily frustrations. Originally, we agreed to share the housework together, but in reality, I was the only one who was actually doing it. I didn't want to make things worse by complaining about the constant promises of doing it next time, but never actually doing so, but I took the plunge and decided to speak up. I hoped that Tyler would change. However, it seems that it was only my wish. Hearing my words, Tyler frowned and crossed his arms disapprovingly. "If there's anything you want to talk about, just say it." Saying this, Tyler took a deep breath and squeezed out the words, "Well, isn't it usually the responsibility of women to do household chores?" "What?" "I'm sorry, I want you to listen without being offended, but when my previous wife was also employed, I left the housework to her, so I naturally thought that you would be in charge." He also made a preamble before talking about something difficult, and I was a little offended by his words, because I felt that I was being compared to his previous wife. Now, the reason why Tyler divorced was somehow understandable. He may not have meant it, but he unknowingly said things that irritated the other person or behaved in a way that he didn't notice. It was unlikely that the dissatisfaction would increase all at once, but if accumulated gradually, anyone would have been angry. I also felt irritated like this, which may have been an unpleasant trait for men. "Let's stay calm here." Much more modestly and gently than usual, I asked him to share the household chores again. Tyler also understood, so I decided to wait and see. However, human beings do not change so easily. Despite my request, within 2 weeks the situation had reversed. Busy, tired, and out of hand, enumerated useful excuses, and Tyler was escaping from household chores. At this rate, it was inevitable that an argument would begin. Shortly after remarrying, tension began to rise between us. I wondered if this was the reality of couples, and looked back on my first marriage. But Tyler wasn't the only one with difficulties. My mother-in-law was also a nuisance. When I remarried, I visited my mother-in-law for the initial greetings. At that time, very heavy words were thrown at me. "Tyler thinks this is his last chance. Wendy, can you take care of him?" The moment she squeezed my hand tightly and asked me so earnestly, I felt a great responsibility. At that time, I believed that I would be able to get along smoothly with Tyler, but I never imagined that the relationship would deteriorate so quickly. Just when I thought that I needed to correct the situation at all costs, something unexpected happened. That was a few months ago. At that time, the company was talking about a long-term business trip. When I received a proposal for a business trip and was wondering what to do, Tyler recommended that I go and gave me a boost. Important decisions were always made through discussion, so I felt reassured by his words. One day, when I returned home, I was confronted with Tyler's infidelity. Why? 3 years have passed since I remarried this year. A few days ago, I was planning to eat at a delicious Italian restaurant for our wedding anniversary, but I couldn't keep up with the sudden scene. Tyler seemed to be happy when he left the room with his cheating partner, but when they found me in the dark living room with the lights off, they both cried out in surprise. "I'm home." "Tyler, can we talk for a moment?" Tyler and his partner looked at each other and nodded slightly, and he walked towards me. The cheating partner left the house in silence. Tyler, who stood in front of me, apologized profusely. "I'm really sorry." "What? I haven't heard anything yet. What does this mean?" I asked him what he was apologizing for because he apologized first. Then he began to explain the details of the affair. His lover was a junior at work, and they often worked together late on projects he was in charge of. At first, it seems that it was intended to be a one-time thing, but it looks like they met many times and had an affair in the end. I recorded this conversation to avoid any discrepancies later on. I didn't expect him to confess so honestly, but I think he had no way out because he got caught in the act. I've pretty much figured out what's going on. I'm sorry, but I'm thinking of separating. Can you leave? What? What happened so suddenly? You know my mom is coming to visit, right? Of course I know, but I can't help it, right? It's urgent. At these words, Tyler's face stiffened and he turned his head. If it's my husband's house, I won't complain. However, this high-rise apartment was where I lived since before I remarried. In other words, it was not property of husband and wife. At that time, I decided to take a long-term business trip. It wasn't a change of pace, but I wanted to calm my mind by focusing on something else. I told Tyler to leave while I was on a business trip. He begged for the last time. Please, I'll take care of all the housework, so. I'm sorry, I'm not generous enough to tolerate infidelity. I just want some time to think about it, so I just want you to be grateful that I don't ask for a divorce right away. Tyler was speechless. After that, I went on a business trip. My mother and sister-in-law often visited. But what will happen when they find out the truth? It's hard to imagine, but they will probably contact me. After returning from a business trip, the opportunity to return home for a short period of time arose. However, there was no family waiting for me. My marriage to Tyler continued. But nothing had been decided about my future yet. I was hesitant to give our marriage another shot. I thought I had learned from my previous mistakes. But it ended up being a failure again, and this time due to cheating. This situation was worse than last time. Above all, I despised cheating. It was hard to forgive, and I was considering divorce myself. I was also aware that this would lead to a second divorce. I thought it might be a good idea to meet him at least once when I returned home, so I decided to contact Tyler after returning home. When I got home, I felt uncomfortable with the unnatural noise. Why was there so much noise? Tyler should have already left the house, but when I entered the house carefully. Oh, Wendy, it's been a long time. What are you here for? What's this? What is this situation? To my confusion, my mother-in-law said, now that you've accepted the divorce, have you calmed down? I couldn't grasp the meaning of her remarks. What did her words mean? At that time, my mother-in-law told me something unbelievable. I've heard that you cheated on Tyler and went to the other man. What? I thought you were caring because you were both remarried, but your actions were disappointing. Honestly, I was disappointed. Really? Tyler made the wrong choice. My mother and sister-in-law put everything into words. I was trying to grasp the situation from what they were saying. Why are they in this house? Why do they think I'm cheating? Gradually, the facts began to surface. Was Tyler lying? But there is also an advantage to this situation. Even though you are gone, this residence is in your name, right? Finally, my mother-in-law mocked me. You've been a really big help for paying rent all this time. I'm grateful. They say that ignorance is bliss, but it is also a kind of misfortune. What do you mean? I deliberately feigned ignorance to them. What are you talking about? It's not me who was cheating. It was Tyler. I notified you about living apart, but what's wrong with that? They looked at me and stopped in amazement. Tyler was cheating? That's a lie, no? I interrupted my mother-in-law and said, has Tyler ever presented you with evidence that I am cheating? Well, no, because he said he didn't want to see it. Notice your mistake, and look at this instead of the supposed evidence of my infidelity that my husband claims he has. I presented a recording of Tyler talking about his affair to my mother and sister-in-law. My mother and sister-in-law covered their mouths with their hands. The story from Tyler and the story I told them were different, and they didn't even seem to know the fact that we lived apart. Therefore, he should be able to leave this house now. But why are you here? My mother-in-law responded to my question a little later. He didn't want to be alone because he was anxious, so he suggested that we live with him. I'm here because of the same reason. They seem to be quite free to act. I had no other choice. I immediately contacted a lawyer and made a request. I had already consulted a lawyer before the trip and was ready to make a request. I'm going to spend tonight somewhere else. Against my mother and sister-in-law, I decided to take a fairly clear position. Return to your original residence by tomorrow, or we will take appropriate legal action. I strongly told them. When they heard these words, their complexions immediately turned pale. The next day, the situation took a sudden turn, and Tyler suddenly contacted me. From the messages he sent me, there was a clear sense of impatience, and I could see that there was probably a lot of pressure from my mother and sister-in-law behind it. And the next day, when I met him as promised, his eyes were almost closed, and it was clear how mentally cornered he was. You look pretty tired. Did you have any trouble? When I asked, his appearance was so heartbreaking that I couldn't help but laugh. even considering the facts I knew. At that time, Tyler suddenly fell to his knees and pleaded earnestly, "Please, don't abandon me. What's the matter? Why so suddenly?" When I asked, he continued, "I heard from my mom and sister, and they knew I was lying. So I thought I'd give it one more shot." I was surprised. "Oh, really?" But Tyler asked for another chance in this difficult situation. He seemed to think that in order to regain the trust of his mother and sister, he would need to convince me first. He spoke to me sincerely. When I look back, it was all my fault and I regret it. From now on, I want to grow as a person. That's why I want you to see the new me. In spite of Tyler's passionate speech, I was determined. "I'm sorry, I can't do that." "Why?" He couldn't hide his look of surprise and disappointment. "You promised to help with the housework, and you said we were going to separate, so you should have left the house, right? How do you think I can trust you from now on that I was lied to by you and let us live in that house?" Tyler choked up. After returning to the US, I had already begun to think about divorce, but when I returned home, my thoughts turned into conviction. No more hesitation. "I've already hired a lawyer so that I can move on. Can you get in touch with them? And I've already told your mother to leave the house, so please leave as soon as possible." "You're kidding." Tyler still said something. After a while, the divorce was realized. Tyler seems to have been cut off from his mother and sister. This lie greatly damaged their credibility, and his social position was also significantly affected. However, my mother and sister-in-law, who believed in Tyler's lie, also paid a heavy price. They were offered to live together, and they gave up their home, forcing them to start a new life in a small apartment. If they had rejected Tyler's proposal, they could have continued to live in their original home, but that option was no longer possible. Tyler tried to continue his relationship with his affair partner, but in fact, she had other relationships, and there were rumors that she had a child with another partner. I heard that Tyler retired from the company because of the shock, and now he is living a life where he lines up at the casino in the morning and only his debts continue to increase. I was subsequently promoted at work. I still enjoy my work, and my efforts so far are paying off. For a while, I would like to have my work as my partner and make my life more enjoyable and enriching. It seems my husband has been possessed by an evil spirit. This house will be given to Jenny. If you disagree, let's divorce. To think that the house I bought would be given to our eldest son's spouse. You better leave this house quickly. Ha ha. My husband sided with his daughter-in-law. I will put the house under my name. A monthly repayment of $1,800 is possible. Ha ha. My eldest son is also on his wife's side. Well, I'm no longer attached to such a dirty house. Then, as you all say, I will leave this house. You three will suffer from now on. Be on the lookout for what's about to happen. My name is Dorothy, and I am 60 years old. I hold a senior position in a leading company and have a higher status than usual. I live with my husband, Frank, who is 2 years younger than me. Last year, we renovated our house in preparation for the future. Our house was built by my father and has aged and deteriorated over the years. Therefore, we wanted to improve the living conditions to spend the coming years comfortably. However, considering our age, the monthly repayment amount is somewhat high at $1,800. But since I am an executive at a large company, the chances of passing the loan screening are pretty high. Frank works in management at a medium-sized restaurant but earns less than me, so the loan is more likely to be approved in my name. My salary alone makes it difficult to continue with the house loan. This house, originally belonging to your father, is currently registered in your name. I'm sorry, but could you take on the full amount of the loan? In return, I will contribute more to the household than before. After such a discussion, we decided to renovate. The renovated house has become more comfortable to live in, almost like a different place. It's very pleasing to know that by renovating the house I've lived in since childhood, I can continue to live here for a long time. I never imagined that the day I would leave this house would come. It was sudden. My cell phone vibrated. I'm getting married. My son Steve told me over the phone. Steve is 31 years old and works as a middle manager in a leading company. My eldest son, who has always been an excellent student, devoted to his studies and club activities, has continued to be enthusiastic about his work as an adult. That might be why I have never heard about his romantic relationships. I was very curious about the woman he was considering marrying. I wonder what kind of person she is. If Steve chose her, she must be charming. However, I'm worried that Steve, who has little experience in love, might be taken advantage of by someone with ulterior motives. I was filled with excitement and worry about meeting the woman my son brought home for the first time. Then, the day of the first meeting arrived. A woman with brown hair and a white chiffon dress, exuding purity, came to visit. "I'm Jenny, please take good care of me." She was polite and charming, making for a likable first impression. "I'm honored to meet you, father and mother." She smiled, showing her sparkling white teeth. "If it's her, I can entrust my son with ease." I felt this way, and it seemed Frank shared a similar opinion, showing a smile. "She's a wonderful girl." When Frank murmured that, she said, "I'm so happy to hear that from you, Dad. I look forward to getting along with you." Gripping Frank's hand tightly and looking back at him. What's happening?" Her intimacy surprised me, and I was a bit bewildered. Steve seemed surprised as well. However, a complex expression appeared on Frank's face. It wasn't jealousy, but it wasn't a comfortable feeling either. What are you doing?" I asked, wishing for her to avoid such actions for my son's sake. She panicked. "Oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done this upon our first meeting," and quickly apologized, withdrawing her hand from Frank's. "I'm often told that I don't understand personal space. It's not intentional, but I'm truly sorry." It seemed like it really wasn't intentional. Still, I was somewhat surprised by her actions, considering I initially had a good impression of her. However, Steve truly loved her. Yeah, Jenny might have a strange sense of personal space. Haha, but that's part of her charm. I'm not good at talking with women, but she approached me proactively. That's why we could become so close and consider marriage. I didn't expect Steve, who is usually passive towards the opposite gender, to change so much because of Jenny. Please take care of Steve. Despite various emotions, if she is a good person, everything will surely be okay. I accepted their engagement. Afterwards, things progressed swiftly, and within a few weeks, they had officially submitted their marriage registration. I wished for the best for their future happiness. One day, half a year after they got married, I'm home. When I returned from work, there were unfamiliar women's shoes at the entrance. Stepping into the living room, I found Jenny. "Oh, Mother, welcome back." The table was littered with empty cans and bottles of alcohol. It seemed they were enjoying some drinks. "What's this?" I wondered about the two of them having a party without Steve. I happened to meet Jenny on my way back from work. We talked about wanting to get closer, so we decided to drink together. But since it was before payday and money was tight, I suggested drinking at home. Why have a party at home? It would have been ideal if Steve also joined, and we all could have had fun together. I don't want to intrude on the newlyweds, but it would have been better if we gathered at Steve and Jenny's place. I tilted my head and answered, "Indeed, we could have done it at our house, but the beauty of this residence is exceptional, and our place is a bit messy right now." Jenny's speech was unclear. She was slurring her words, clearly quite drunk. Hearing her normally precise speech become lax under the influence of alcohol was unexpected. But what was the reason for enjoying the alcohol just between the two of them? "Why didn't you call Steve?" I found it unusual for a daughter-in-law to come to her in-law's house to drink, especially during the honeymoon phase. After seeing them together, I started to look for Steve. Steve is currently busy with work and working late into the night. Because of that, I've been feeling very lonely. Jenny said, starting to cry. "It's okay, Jenny, you've done nothing wrong. The problem lies with Steve, who leaves you alone despite being newlyweds." Saying this, Frank gently stroked her head. Father, what is this situation? I feel increasingly uncomfortable." "Look, Frank, Jenny is Steve's wife. It's wrong to do this, especially to Steve." I scolded Frank for his excessive behavior. And then, suddenly, "Oh, don't be so harsh on father." Jenny stood up for Frank. "What?" I reflexively uttered in surprise, confused by her statement. I had a lot I wanted to say, but the day's fatigue made everything feel bothersome. I'm going to take a bath. Please clean up after yourselves, I said with a sigh and headed to the bathroom. Afterwards, I called Steve to explain the situation, and he replied that he would leave work and come to pick her up immediately. Jenny's behavior seemed very odd to me. However, the fact that Steve rushed over to get her showed me how deep his affection is towards her. But I couldn't shake off the feeling that their future domestic life might be somewhat troublesome. Reluctantly, I decided to give advice about their future life when Steve arrived. While lost in thought in the bathroom, quite some time had passed. Returning to the living room with a somewhat dazed mind from the heat, Steve should have already picked up Jenny, but oddly, despite coming by car, they both seemed to be enjoying alcohol. Steve, you came by car, right? Why are you drinking? I asked, to which Steve, appearing drunk and cheerful, replied, actually, Jenny told me to drink, and it turned out we're staying over tonight. It's good news that my son is staying over. However, the unexpected accompaniment of his wife was somewhat concerning. The decision felt quite abrupt. What? I was inwardly astonished, but Steve had already drunk alcohol. Hey, Mom can drive you. It's okay. I didn't want the daughter-in-law to stay over. Despite feeling tired, I offered to drive them home. However, Steve said, come on, it's okay. You're tired too, right? Why don't you join us for a drink instead? With an innocent smile. At that moment, I found myself speechless without any room for argument. Haha, huh? At that instant, a feeling of discomfort sprouted within me. Suddenly, Jenny looked at me with a smirk, as if her smile harbored some conspiracy. Could it be? It seemed like she was laughing at my puzzled appearance. It's just my imagination, right? I truly hoped it was a misunderstanding, but in reality, her plan had already been set in motion at that point. The next day, Jenny apologized deeply for her missteps multiple times. I am terribly sorry, she said before leaving, and I felt like peace had finally been restored, overwhelmed by fatigue. But when I returned home that day, Jenny was there again. Steve was nowhere to be seen. Disheartened by the previous day's events, there was a change in her demeanor. I'm sorry for the inconvenience again, but I really wanted to apologize in person, she said, handing over some sweets. I too lost my composure yesterday. I'm truly sorry. Frank seemed regretful as well. Seeing their remorse, I decided to forgive them this time. I appreciate it. Jenny seemed genuinely relieved, but perhaps because the situation was quite awkward, she stopped visiting our home afterwards. Honestly, I did not want to get deeply involved either, so I was grateful for that outcome. Then one day, Frank, with a serious look, said, I have something to tell you. As I waited in the living room, wondering what was going on, Steve and Jenny visited for the first time in a while. It's been a while, I greeted, but they seemed to ignore my words and passed by as if they hadn't heard me. Perhaps my voice didn't reach them. Suddenly, Frank declared loudly, this house will be given to Jenny. If you disagree, let's divorce. What? I was astonished. The discussion of transferring the house to Jenny came out of nowhere. It was a baffling situation. While I was confused, Jenny said, please leave this place. What does she mean? I'm confused. Wait a minute. What do you mean by transferring the house to Jenny? I asked, to which Frank replied, you've been making Jenny suffer, haven't you? That's unforgivable. She's such a good girl. Making her suffer. There's no such fact. However, Frank refused to listen to my argument. Shut up. I heard it from her. That's why she was crying, saying she couldn't go home. Frank continued angrily, with Jenny shedding tears. Why has it come to this? Then Steve also burst out in anger. I never thought my mother could do such a thing. You're horrible. The more I denied, the angrier they became, and Jenny's tears didn't stop. That's why we're going to divorce. Leave this house immediately. I plan to continue living here with them. I couldn't understand why I had to transfer my own house to Jenny. When I asked for the reason, because Jenny is deeply hurt. We could have sought compensation, but we thought of a better solution. Taking this valuable house from you and giving it to Jenny is the appropriate punishment for you. was the response I received, even though I didn't make her suffer. Why should I face such retaliation? It's impossible for Jenny, who quit her job after getting married, to pay a monthly loan of $1,800, I argued. Don't worry, we'll change the name to Steve. As long as Steve is working, the name change should be possible right away. However, there are restrictions on changing the name on a loan contract, so it wouldn't be that simple. In reality, changing the loan terms wouldn't be easy. I doubt the bank will allow it. When I counted, Frank said, "Don't worry, not only you, but Steve also works at a letting company. Plus, I have an acquaintance at the financial institution where you have the loan. If I talk to him, it should go smoothly." Appearing fully convinced. Yeah, a monthly repayment of $1,800? Piece of cake. Influenced by Frank's confidence, Steve also agreed. Gradually, the reality of transferring the house to them became apparent. I've said it many times, but I didn't do anything to her. There's no way I'm handing over this house. As I strongly objected, they became furious again. I was fed up with this situation. Then Jenny, who had been crying all this time, spoke up. "Mother, for the sake of us and our unborn child, please," she pleaded while caressing her belly. Unbelievable. "Mom, Jenny is actually pregnant right now. If her mental state becomes unstable, it could lead to the worst-case scenario. That's why I hope you can be a bit more lenient." Steve revealed the fact of her pregnancy. Indeed, stress during pregnancy should be avoided. However, being forced to transfer my home based on unfounded accusations is unacceptable. My heart was filled with turmoil. "I need some peace and quiet," I said, leaving the scene for the bedroom. Could I have unconsciously made Jenny suffer? I pondered while lying in bed when I found a strand of brown hair on the bed. What's this? Both Frank and I have black hair, so finding brown hair here is strange. Could it be Frank? My heart was disturbed. After the recent troubles, to find such a shocking discovery was overwhelming. I was getting confused. What's in the world? I cried myself to sleep. Waking up late at night, I was headed to the living room when I heard voices inside. Apparently, Steve and Jenny hadn't gone home yet. I wished I could have joined the evening drink. Someone said, "But Jenny, you're pregnant. You need to refrain," was the response. Hearing Frank and Jenny conversing joyfully, it felt like there was no space for me. My heart was heavy due to Jenny's inexplicable complaints. Standing frozen outside the living room, suddenly, an intimate sound reached my ears. "Ah, Jenny, I love you." Frank's voice. "Stop it, Frank. If Steve and Mother find out," Jenny replied. Shocked, I was disturbed by what Frank and Jenny were doing. "What on earth is happening?" "Don't worry. Steve is completely drunk, and Dorothy has been cooped up in her room all this time. She must be asleep by now." Haha, they were discussing. Haha, maybe she's angry and hiding under the bed? How funny. Haha, they laughed together. The brown hair I found was probably Jenny's. This is very unpleasant. What were they doing on my bed where I slept? I felt sick. They intend to push me out and secretly enjoy themselves with Jenny. My house being used inappropriately like this. Fine. I'll leave this uncomfortable house behind. However, I won't forget this. I thought to myself. The next day, I appeared in front of the three as if nothing had happened. In reality, I couldn't sleep in that bed anymore, too shocked to even close my eyes. "So, you've finally decided to transfer the house?" They smiled all at once when I said, "I've decided to transfer the house." "Great. Let's go for the name change procedures. I'll easily pass the loan screening." Steve was excited. He knows nothing. Although it saddened me at the moment, I had no intention of revealing the truth to my son. He wouldn't listen to his mother since he was under his wife's thumb. At least not yet. Afterwards, busy days of divorce proceedings and name changes followed. The name change process wasn't easy, but it was eventually completed. "This house is no longer yours." Haha, Frank taunted. "Hurry up and leave, old hag." Haha, Jenny whispered in my ear. I felt nothing but anger. They were the ones who were supposed to leave. I intended to make them, but not before getting back at them. Letting go of the home I had lived in since I was born was painful. Yet, I could no longer feel attached to a place associated with infidelity. I planned to use this abnormal situation to create turmoil between them. Wait and see when the time comes. A month after I left the house. I'm ready, is what I said and headed to my former home. As I pressed the doorbell, Frank responded irritably, "What do you want, stranger?" Despite it being our first encounter in a long time. "I have something to discuss. Won't you let me in?" I answered firmly. "Why should I let you into the house?" Frank stubbornly refused my entry. "I have something very important to discuss, especially to Jenny." "An important matter concerning Jenny?" Frank's response shifted. Mentioning her name, they readily invited me inside. Using her name was the last thing I wanted. However, it was clear that Frank was heavily influenced by her, so I leveraged that. "You're a stranger now." Stranger. Even though legally we're strangers after the divorce, that term felt too heartless. I was infuriated by Frank's reaction. "Why are you here now?" They became more guarded. "I want you to see this," I said, displaying some photographs. "What is this?" Their surprised voices filled the room. The photos were of Frank and her on a date, captured by a detective I hired to follow them after our divorce, recording their moments together. "Wait, what? This is..." Steve was unsettled. "So what? We're just daughter-in-law and father-in-law with a good relationship. Nothing more, right? Why would you take such meaningless photos?" "What do you want?" They insisted they were just close. "Really? Then what about this?" I pulled out my smartphone and played a certain audio. "I've always liked Jenny. Keep your voice down, or Steve and my mother-in-law will hear." Their voices and inappropriate sounds were recorded. "What's this?" On the day I discovered their relationship, I had secretly recorded their conversation. "You're just misunderstanding." Frank desperately tried to explain. "Misunderstanding? This is clearly a problem." Steve erupted in anger. Jenny just looked down. I pressed further. "Let me ask you, whose child is in your belly, really?" Steve's complexion changed. "Could it be Dad's?" He was lost for words. "That's impossible. He always comes." "Oh," she inadvertently confessed. "You admitted it. You just said it." Their argument intensified and Frank and Steve got into a scuffle. Ouch! Jenny seemed to be in pain, which made them stop fighting. I seized the moment. "Haven't I always said I didn't make Jenny suffer? Did you lie to get rid of me, to convince Steve?" Steve was shocked. "No, I'm the worst. Why didn't I believe my mom?" He blamed himself for being swayed by Jenny and doubting his mother. "It's so clear now. We should talk about this." Steve raised his voice at them. Initially silent, "With all this evidence, are you considering a lawsuit?" Apparently, Jenny initially had genuine feelings for Steve. But upon visiting our newly renovated beautiful home before their marriage, she began to desire it. My family home was a bit run down, and I aspired for such a beautiful house. The interior was also quite lovely. She tearfully explained. Wanting the house, she decided to get closer to Frank, using opportunities when he returned from work to drink without Steve. The months she didn't visit the house, she became close to Frank, plotting to get rid of me. "You could have just suggested living together from the start." When I said that, she remained silent before finally responding. "I don't have a positive impression of mothers-in-law. My own mother and grandmother were always fighting, and my grandmother constantly bullied my mother. So, I wanted to avoid living with my mother-in-law. Getting rid of you was the only solution to live comfortably in a beautiful house. If she had such an image of a mother-in-law, she wouldn't want to live together. But to go as far as taking my husband." However, how did Frank perceive this situation? I knew I was being used, but I fell for her the moment we exchanged greetings, shook hands, and she smiled at me. Despite knowing he was being used, Frank fell in love and decided to abandon me to keep her by his side. "You guys are really unforgivable," Steve said as both of them looked down, tears streaming down their faces. Steve decided to get a divorce. DNA tests on the newborn confirmed Frank as the father. "I won't be paying child support," he declared, demanding alimony from them. "I made a similar choice. I never thought I'd be demanding alimony from my own father." I gently patted Steve's head as he sobbed. Our lives were thrown into chaos because of a foolish woman's actions. However, the life that got thrown into chaos the most was her own, which she would regret forever. My prediction was spot on. 2 years later, she chose to continue living with Frank in a de facto marital relationship, claiming it was for the child's sake. And to work and raise her child, she had to leave her newborn at daycare. "Today, Grandpa, Dad came to pick you up, huh?" She seemed to attract attention from other mothers at the daycare. While the children played well together, she felt lonely not being able to make any mom friends. Additionally, when she explained her divorce and relationship with Frank to her parents, they got furious, directing their anger at Frank too. Now, she is estranged from them. This was all the result of her own choices. Meanwhile, Steve lives alone in that house. I wanted to sell it, but that would be too cruel to Mom. After all, this is the house where Mom has lived all her life. I couldn't sell a house filled with such memories. He felt disgusted by the house and considered selling it but couldn't due to guilt, possibly influenced by my repeated expressions of discomfort towards the house. He arranged for house cleaning and disposed of all possessions belonging to Frank and her. Steve, acknowledging the trouble caused by her, said, "It might be because of that woman, but I've troubled you, Mom. You might not be able to forgive me, but please let's meet up sometimes. Visit the house. And let me be a good son to you from now on." And gave me trip tickets. Steve has shown deep remorse. Although I can't forgive him just yet, I'm willing to work towards restoring our relationship.